I never imagined I'd be sleeping on a pull-out couch in my own basement at 62 years old, listening to footsteps above me in the home Frank and I built with our bare hands. But there I was, staring at the ceiling, wondering how my son, the little boy I'd rocked to sleep for countless nights, could stand by while his wife told me the master bedroom was being repurposed, and I should feel lucky to have any space at all. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The day I called my attorney, something in me changed. I remember sitting in my car, hands trembling as I dialed, tears streaming down my face. "Judith, they've gone too far," I whispered into the phone, afraid they might hear me even from the driveway. I didn't know it then, but that single call would transform everything. When I walked back into that house, I wasn't just Martha Reynolds anymore. I was a woman reclaiming what was rightfully hers. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning. I've always been the kind of mother who believed in giving my children roots and wings. Frank and I raised Kevin to be independent, hardworking and kind. We sacrificed, we saved, we did everything parents are supposed to do. After 35 years at First National Trust, I'd climbed my way from teller to senior loan officer, helping countless families secure their first homes. Frank built his hardware store from nothing, working 70-hour weeks so Kevin could attend college without debt. Our 2-story craftsman house in Maple Grove Estates wasn't a mansion, but it was our dream home. The place where we'd planned to grow old together, hosting holidays, and eventually, we hoped, bouncing grandchildren on our knees. Every corner held memories. The kitchen where I'd taught Kevin to bake his grandmother's apple pie recipe, the living room where we'd opened Christmas presents each year, the oak tree in the backyard where Frank had built Kevin's treehouse. We first met Allison at Kevin's office holiday party 4 years ago. She seemed sweet, attentive, and genuinely interested in our stories. Her laugh was infectious, her compliments thoughtful. "I can see where Kevin gets his kind eyes," she told me that night, squeezing my hand. "He talks about you all the time." Kevin looked at her like she hung the moon. Frank and I exchanged glances. That special, silent communication long-married couples perfect over decades. We were thrilled to see our son so happy. The engagement came 6 months later. Kevin proposed at our family lake house, getting down on one knee during sunset. Allison cried. We all celebrated with champagne, and I embraced my future daughter-in-law, already dreaming of the wonderful years ahead. "Welcome to the family," I whispered, meaning every word. Planning the wedding was my first glimpse behind Allison's carefully constructed facade. Small disagreements arose over the guest list, the venue, the menu. "Martha, I appreciate your input," she'd say with a tight smile that never reached her eyes. "But we want our special day to reflect our taste, not yours." I backed off, reminding myself that each generation does things differently. This wasn't my wedding. I was just there to support. What concerned me more was Kevin's growing silence. My once outspoken son began deferring to Allison on everything, checking his phone when she texted, excusing himself to call her back immediately regardless of what family activity we were engaged in. When I gently asked if everything was all right, he'd respond with a rehearsed, "Everything's perfect, Mom. Allison just likes to stay connected." Then came the day we met her family. Richard and Diane Parker hosted us for dinner at their home in Westview. While the house appeared impressive, from the outside something felt off inside. The furniture seemed barely used, family photos were sparse, and conversation felt strained, as if we were actors in a play rather than families getting to know each other. "Kevin tells us you're in banking," Richard remarked over dessert, cutting his cheesecake into precise squares. "Must be comfortable." "I've been blessed with a good career," I responded, feeling Frank's hand squeeze mine under the table. "I'm retiring next year, Retiring. Diane's eyebrows shot up. How lovely. And your house is paid off, I assume. Frank cleared his throat. We've been mortgage-free for about 10 years now. An odd look passed between Richard and Diane, something calculating that made me sit straighter in my chair. That's wonderful, Diane continued, her voice overly sweet. You know, we always taught Allison and Brian that family supports family. It's so important these days, with the economy being what it is. I nodded politely, not yet understanding that I was being sized up, assessed not as Kevin's mother, but as an asset to be acquired. The wedding was beautiful despite the growing tensions. Kevin beamed as Allison walked down the aisle, and I forced myself to focus on their happiness rather than the whispers between Allison and her mother whenever I approached. Frank and I gave them a generous check as a wedding gift, which they used as a down payment on a small starter home across town. For almost a year, things seemed fine. Sunday dinners, occasional movie nights, normal new family adjustments. Then, Frank had his heart attack. It was sudden, devastating, and completely transformed our lives. One moment he was mowing the lawn, the next he was on the ground clutching his chest. He survived, thank God, but the doctors were clear. His recovery would be long, challenging, and require significant lifestyle changes. His mobility was limited, he couldn't drive, and managing the hardware store became impossible. Kevin stepped up immediately, helping with store operations while I focused on Frank's care. Allison was attentive too, bringing meals and offering assistance. You two shouldn't be alone in this big house, she said one evening, watching Frank struggle with his walker. It's dangerous, especially with all these stairs. Looking back, I should have recognized the concern in her voice wasn't entirely for our welfare. A week later, Kevin approached us with what seemed like a sensible proposal. Dad needs constant care, Mom's exhausted trying to do everything, and you're living in a 2-story house with steep stairs, he explained. Meanwhile, Allison and I are cramped in our place, which has no yard and terrible school districts for when we start our family. His solution appeared perfect. They would sell their starter home and move in with us. Kevin would take over the hardware store permanently, Allison would help with Frank's care, and we'd all benefit from the arrangement. We'll pay the utilities and groceries, Kevin promised. You can focus on Dad's recovery without worrying about the house or the business. Frank and I discussed it privately that night. Despite some reservations, the practical benefits seemed overwhelming. Frank needed help, the business needed management, and having family close would bring comfort during this difficult time. They're family, Frank said, squeezing my hand weakly. And family takes care of each other. The first week after they moved in felt like an adjustment period. Allison rearranged the kitchen, explaining that a more modern organization system would make meal preparation easier. Kevin converted the spare bedroom into a home office. Small changes, nothing alarming. Then Allison's parents visited for dinner. What a charming house, Diane remarked, running her finger along the mantel and examining it for dust. So, quaint, but functional. Richard wandered freely, opening closets, examining our belongings as if conducting an inventory. Solid construction, he noted, tapping walls. They don't build them like this anymore. After dinner, Allison gave them a tour, including our bedroom. I overheard Richard say, "This master suite is perfect. South-facing windows, connected bathroom, plenty of space." Later that evening, I found Allison measuring our bedroom walls. Just getting ideas for drapes, she explained quickly. The sunlight must bother Frank in the mornings. The following day, Richard and Diane returned, with suitcases. "Mom, I forgot to mention," Kevin said, helping carry their bags inside. "Allison's parents are staying with us for a few weeks. Dad's remodeling their kitchen, and they need somewhere to stay." I glanced at Frank, whose expression mirrored my confusion. "Kevin, we weren't prepared for house guests. Where will they sleep? We've got it all figured out, Allison interjected cheerfully. They'll take the guest room. But that's where my sister stays when she visits next month, I protested. Allison's smile didn't waver. We can work something out when the time comes. Family has to be flexible, right? 2 weeks stretched into a month. Richard and Diane made themselves increasingly comfortable, using our things without asking, criticizing our outdated decor, and monopolizing the television. When Frank mentioned their extended stay, Richard clapped him on the shoulder. Don't worry about it. We're practically family now. Then Brian and Jennifer arrived with their 3-year-old son Tyler, supposedly for a weekend visit. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. They too brought multiple suitcases. There's a small problem with their apartment complex, Allison explained vaguely. Plumbing issues. They just need somewhere to stay until it's fixed. That evening, I overheard a conversation that chilled me to the bone. The house is perfect, Brian was saying. Plenty of room once we make some adjustments. Martha's still a problem, Allison replied. She's too attached to everything being her way. But with Frank's condition, she's outnumbered. Mom and Dad are working on that, Brian assured her. Once we're all settled, she'll understand this is a family house now, not just hers. I confronted Kevin that night, my hands shaking with anger and disbelief. Kevin, what's really going on? Why are Allison's entire family moving in without any discussion? Kevin looked uncomfortable but defensive. Mom, they're family too. Dad needs help, and more hands make lighter work. The arrangement benefits everyone. We agreed to you and Allison moving in, not her entire extended family taking over our home. Our home, he corrected quietly. We all live here now. And with Dad's medical bills, the extra financial support helps, doesn't it? Ooh, what financial support? I demanded. They're not paying rent. They're using our utilities, eating our food, and treating this place like a hotel. Kevin's expression hardened. Allison and I are managing the house and the store. Without us, you'd be drowning right now? Can't you just be grateful for the help? The word grateful felt like a slap. This was our home, paid for with decades of hard work. Now I was expected to be thankful for being allowed to remain in it? The situation deteriorated rapidly after that confrontation. Allison's family began referring to rooms as theirs. Richard started parking his car in the garage, forcing mine to the driveway. Diane rearranged my kitchen entirely, packing away my mother's china because it was taking up too much valuable cabinet space. When I objected, the responses became increasingly hostile. Martha, you're being selfish, Diane sniffed. Large. Houses are meant for families, not just 2 elderly people. We're all making sacrifices, Richard added. You should see this as an opportunity to downsize your possessions. The final straw came 3 months after they'd moved in. I returned, from taking Frank to a doctor's appointment to find workmen in our bedroom, dismantling our bed frame. What's happening? I demanded. Allison appeared, clipboard in hand. Oh, Martha, you're back early. We're just making some necessary changes for everyone's comfort. What changes? That's our bedroom. Was your bedroom, she corrected gently, as if speaking to a child. We've been discussing this for weeks. Frank needs to be on the main floor for his health, and this room is perfect for my parents since they'll be staying long-term. We never agreed to this. Kevin did, she said simply. And he's now the primary decision-maker since Frank's health issues. The basement apartment is already set up for you. It's actually much more practical. Private bathroom, kitchenette, separate entrance. You'll have independence while still being close to Frank. Where is Frank now? Kevin took him to the hardware store to get him out of the house during the construction. He was absolutely fine with the new arrangement. When we discussed it, I knew immediately she was lying. Frank would never agree to such a thing without talking to me first. But his medication often left him confused, easily influenced. When they returned, Frank looked disoriented. "Martha, they say we're moving to the basement now. Is that right?" "No," I said firmly. "We are not moving to the basement of our own home." Kevin stepped between us. "Mom, please don't make this difficult. Dad needs fewer stairs. You need less responsibility, and this arrangement works for everyone." "By everyone, you mean Allison's family," I snapped. "This is our house, Kevin. We paid for it. We own it." His expression changed then, something cold and unfamiliar crossing his face. "Actually, if you check the paperwork from last month, you'll find that's not entirely true anymore." My blood ran cold. "What paperwork?" "The transfer of property Dad signed. It adds me to the deed as co-owner with right of survivorship. It was for estate planning purposes, remember? To avoid probate later?" I did remember Frank signing something Kevin had presented as just formalities for the business handover. Frank had been heavily medicated that day, barely able to hold the pen. "You tricked your father," I whispered, the full weight of their betrayal crashing down on me. Kevin's face hardened. "I protected our family's future. The house stays in, the family this way, and everyone benefits." He gestured around. "Look at all the help you're getting. You should be grateful." That night, I found myself on the pull-out couch in the basement, listening to footsteps overhead. In my kitchen, my living room, my bedroom. Frank was installed in a hospital bed in what had once been our den, confused and sedated. When I tried to explain what had happened, Allison appeared with his medication, effectively ending our conversation. Days passed, then weeks. I became essentially a guest in my own home, allowed to visit Frank during designated hours, expected to eat meals on their schedule, criticized if I disrupted the household routine by using the main floor kitchen or laundry facilities at inconvenient times. My beautiful dining set, passed down through 3 generations of my family, was moved to the garage to make room for Allison's modern table. My garden was replanted according to Diane's preferences. My opinions were dismissed, my objections ignored. "Martha, at your age you should be grateful for such a comfortable setup," Richard would say whenever I protested. "Most people your age are struggling in retirement homes." I tried reasoning with Kevin repeatedly, but he'd become a stranger to me, parroting Allison's words about what's best for everyone and how I was resistant to change. When I mentioned our ownership rights, he'd remind me of the altered deed and suggest that making waves could result in me losing access to Frank completely. The threat was clear: comply or be separated from my husband of 40 years. I felt trapped, depressed, increasingly isolated. Friends stopped visiting because Allison made them uncomfortable. My sister's planned visit was canceled because we don't have space right now, despite the 5 bedrooms in our home. Even my weekly book club was deemed disruptive to the household schedule. One particularly difficult evening, I sat alone in the basement, staring at old photos of our family, wondering how my sweet boy had become this callous stranger. My phone rang. Susan Thompson, my oldest friend who had retired to Florida years earlier. "Martha? You don't sound like yourself. What's wrong?" The dam broke. Through tears, I explained everything. The takeover, the manipulation, the isolation, Frank's deteriorating condition, the amended deed, all of it. Susan listened in horrified silence, then said words that changed everything. "Martha Reynolds, I've known you for 40 years, and I've never heard you sound so defeated. This isn't you. This is elder abuse, plain and simple, and you need to fight back." "How? They've taken everything. They control Frank's care. They have legal rights to the house now." "Based on what you've told me, that amended deed wouldn't stand up to legal scrutiny. Frank wasn't competent to sign it. Call my nephew Michael. He's a partner at Greenwood and Associates now. He specializes in elder law." "I can't afford a lawyer," I whispered. They control all the accounts now. Call him, Susan insisted. Tell him I sent you. The consultation is free and we'll figure out the rest. The next morning, I drove to the Morning Brew coffee shop, far from prying eyes, and called Michael Carter. He listened attentively, asking pointed questions about Frank's mental state when signing documents, about verbal agreements versus written ones, about witness signatures and notarizations. Mrs. Reynolds, he said finally, what they've done constitutes elder abuse, undue influence, and potentially fraud. That deed modification wouldn't survive a competency challenge, especially given your husband's documented medical condition at the time of signing. Hope flickered for the first time in months. What can I do? Quite a lot, actually. First, we need to secure your position and protect your husband. I can file for an emergency guardianship hearing and request a temporary freeze on any further property transfers or major decisions regarding your home. His confidence bolstered mine. And then? Then we fight. Based on what you've told me, we have a strong case to invalidate the deed transfer and potentially pursue damages for the emotional distress you've suffered. I thought of Frank, confused and medicated, being used as a pawn against me. Of my son allowing his wife's family to push his mother into the basement. Of all I had lost, my dignity, my home, my sense of security. I want my house back, I said, my voice stronger than it had been in months. I want my life back. Then let's get started, Michael replied. I can have the emergency petition filed today. As I hung up, an unfamiliar calm settled over me. For too long, I'd been the agreeable mother-in-law, the accommodating parent, the one expected to sacrifice without complaint. That ended today. I sat a moment longer, watching people come and go from the coffee shop. Young couples, business, people, parents with children, all moving through life assuming the people who loved them would always protect them. I had believed the same once. I squared my shoulders, left a tip for my barely touched coffee, and walked to my car with purpose. The Martha who had been sleeping in the basement, afraid to use her own kitchen, was gone. In her place stood a woman ready to fight for everything she had built. What I didn't know then was just how dramatically everything was about to change. For all of us. I returned to the house with Michael's business card tucked safely in my purse, a small piece of cardstock that somehow felt like armor. The driveway was crowded with unfamiliar cars. Apparently, Richard and Diane were hosting some kind of gathering. In my house, without telling me. As I entered through the side door, the sound of laughter and clinking glasses filled the air. I recognized Diane's voice, artificially bright as she addressed a room of strangers. We've done so much with the place already, but you should have seen it before. So dated, Martha just couldn't keep up with modern trends. I paused in the hallway, my hand still on the doorknob. Through the partially open door to the living room, I could see a dozen or so people perched on furniture I had selected, drinking. From crystal glasses that had been wedding gifts to Frank and me, admiring the space that had been my sanctuary for 25 years. The poor thing just couldn't manage anymore, Diane continued, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial whisper that nevertheless carried perfectly to where I stood. With Frank's condition, it was becoming dangerous. Kevin practically had to beg her to accept help. My cheeks burned with a mixture of humiliation and rage. This woman was using my husband's illness to paint me as incompetent, all while entertaining guests in my home as if she owned it. Where is Martha now? Someone asked. Mrs. Prescott from down the street, I realized with a jolt. These weren't strangers. They were my neighbors. Oh, she has a lovely little apartment in the basement, Diane replied smoothly. Completely self-contained. She can come and go as she pleases, but honestly, it's better for everyone this way. She was becoming quite difficult. A murmur of sympathetic understanding rippled through the room. My neighbors, people I'd hosted for barbecues, whose children I'd watched grow up, were accepting this twisted narrative without question. It's so common with aging parents, Richard added sagely. They can't admit when it's time to step back and let the younger generation take over. Martha's lucky Kevin is such a devoted son. Many families would have moved her to a care facility by now. I must have made some sound of protest because Richard's head suddenly turned toward the hallway. Our eyes met, and a flicker of something. Not shame exactly, but wariness crossed his face. "Martha," he called out with artificial warmth. "Come join us. We're just having a little get-together with some of the neighbors." All eyes turned to me as I stepped into the room. I felt disheveled and small compared to the perfectly coiffed Diane, who wore an expression of practiced concern. "Martha, dear, you really should have used the basement entrance," she chided gently. "You know we're entertaining today." "No, I didn't know," I replied, forcing my voice to remain steady. "I wasn't informed that you were hosting an event in my home." An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. Mrs. Prescott shifted awkwardly in her seat, while Mr. Henderson suddenly became very interested in his drink. "Our home," Kevin corrected, appearing from the kitchen with a tray of canapes. "Remember our discussion, Mom? We all live here now, as a family." "Where's Frank?" I asked, ignoring the correction. "Resting," Allison answered quickly. "He was getting overwhelmed with all the excitement, so we gave him his medication a bit early. He's much more comfortable now." Medicated into submission, she meant. My hands curled into fists at my sides. "I'd like to see my husband," I said firmly. Allison and Kevin exchanged a glance. "Maybe later, Mom," Kevin suggested. "He's just fallen asleep, and you know how disoriented he gets when his rest is interrupted." Before I could protest further, Richard deftly changed the subject. "Martha, we were just telling everyone about the new landscaping plans. Kevin showed us the designs yesterday. The koi pond will be such a lovely addition to the backyard." "Koi pond?" I echoed. The backyard was my domain. The vegetable garden I'd lovingly tended for decades. The rose bushes Frank had planted for our 20th anniversary. The maple tree where we'd hung a swing for Kevin as a child. "It's going to be beautiful," Diane gushed. "We've hired the most wonderful landscape architect. Of course, we'll have to remove those old roses in that vegetable patch. So outdated, really. But the transformation will be worth it." The room began to spin slightly. They were erasing us, piece by piece. Our memories, our choices, our life together. Replacing everything with their vision, their preferences, their control. I looked at Kevin, searching for any sign of the boy I'd raised, the son who had once helped me plant those very roses. His eyes slid away from mine, unable or unwilling to acknowledge what he was allowing to happen. "If you'll excuse me," I managed to say with as much dignity as I could muster, "I need to check on my husband." As I turned to leave, I heard Diane's stage whisper, "Poor thing. The confusion comes and goes. Some days are better than others." I made my way to Frank's room, expecting to find him asleep as Allison had claimed. Instead, he was awake, staring at the ceiling, his face lined with frustration. "Frank?" I whispered, closing the door behind me and rushing to his side. "Are you okay?" His eyes focused on me, and for a moment, perfect clarity shone in them. "Martha," he said, his voice stronger than I'd heard in weeks. They took my watch. I glanced at his nightstand. The antique pocket watch his father had given him was indeed missing. "Richard said it should be stored somewhere safer," Frank continued, distress evident in his voice. "But it's mine, Martha. My father gave it to me." I sat on the edge of the bed and took his hand. "I know, sweetheart. I'll get it back." Frank's grip tightened on mine. "Something's wrong here. They're always whispering, moving things, telling me what's best. I'm sick, not stupid." His eyes searched mine. "Why are you sleeping in the basement?" My heart leapt at his lucidity. You remember that? Of course I remember. I've been foggy, but I'm still here. His voice lowered. They give me pills, so many pills. Some days I can hardly string thoughts together. But I know what's happening, Martha. They're taking over. Tears welled in my eyes. I'm going to fix this, Frank. I promise you. He nodded slightly, then glanced fearfully at the door. Be careful. Allison checks on me every 30 minutes. She says it's for my safety, but it feels like surveillance, I finished for him. Exactly. His eyes drifted closed for a moment, then snapped back open with effort. Martha, listen carefully. In my desk, the one in the garage, back of the bottom drawer, there's a false bottom. Important papers there. Our will, the original deed, insurance policies, everything. I stared at him in surprise. You hid them? A ghost of his old smile crossed his face. I may be ill, but I'm not completely trusting. Kevin was asking too many questions about our finances. Something felt off. My Frank, always thinking ahead. Even in his weakened state, he'd had the presence of mind to protect our most important documents. I'll get them, I promised, squeezing his hand. The door opened suddenly, and Allison appeared, her expression shifting from surprise to practiced concern. Martha, I didn't realize you were in here. Is everything all right? Frank's hand tensed in mine. We're fine, I replied evenly. Just spending time together, as married couples do. Of course, she said with a tight smile. But it's time for Frank's heart medication. Why don't you give us a few minutes? You know how he prefers privacy for his medical routines. It wasn't a request, and we both knew it. I kissed Frank's forehead and stood up. I'll be back later, I told him, trying to communicate with my eyes that he should be careful, that help was coming. He nodded almost imperceptibly. I made my way back through the house, ignoring the curious glances from the neighbors still gathered in my living room. I needed to get to that desk in the garage, but not with a dozen witnesses milling about. In the kitchen, I found Kevin arranging more hors d'oeuvres on la plateau. For a moment, I simply watched him. My son, my only child. The boy who had once brought me dandelions and called them flowers. When had he become this stranger who could stand by while his mother was relegated to the basement, while his father was medicated into compliance? Kevin, I said quietly. He startled slightly, nearly dropping a stuffed mushroom. Mom, you scared me. Can we talk? Privately? I kept my voice gentle, maternal. Whatever had happened, whatever influence Allison had exerted, he was still my son. Kevin glanced toward the living room, then nodded reluctantly. Just for a minute. The guests? Should be entertaining themselves, I finished firmly. This is important. I led him to the laundry room off the kitchen, one of the few spaces Allison's family hadn't yet claimed for their own purposes, and closed the door. Kevin, what's happening here? Really happening? I asked directly. He shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting around the small space as if seeking an escape route. What do you mean? You know exactly what I mean. Why am I sleeping in the basement of my own home? Why is Frank being medicated to the point where he can barely stay conscious? Why are Richard and Diane acting like they own this house? And why are you allowing it? Kevin's face flushed, a mixture of guilt and defensiveness washing over his features. Mom, we've been through this. It's what's best for everyone, especially Dad. His care needs— Stop, I interrupted. Your father is being over-medicated, and you know it. He has moments of perfect clarity when Allison isn't hovering with pills. The doctors prescribed a regimen that Allison has taken upon herself to adjust, I countered. When was the last time you actually spoke to your father's doctors yourself? Not just accepted what Allison told you they said? Kevin's silence was answer enough. And this house, I continued, pressing my advantage. Your father and I worked for 30 years to pay it off. It's our legacy to you, yes, but after we're gone. Not while we're still very much alive and being treated like unwelcome guests. That's not fair, Kevin protested weakly. You're not guests. We're just managing things better now. Better for whom? Certainly not for Frank and me. Not when I'm sleeping on a pull-out couch and he's being kept sedated. Kevin ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so reminiscent of his father that my heart ached. Mom, you don't understand. There's financial pressure you don't know about. The store isn't doing as well as Dad thought. Allison's parents. They've helped us. Ah, there it was. They've helped you financially in exchange for control of our home. It's not like that, he protested, but his eyes told a different story. What kind of help, Kevin? How much money? He swallowed hard. They paid off our mortgage and some credit card debt. In exchange for? Kevin looked at the floor. They needed a place to stay, their house. There were issues with it. What kind of issues? His hesitation told me everything I needed to know. They were foreclosed on, weren't they? It's complicated, he muttered. So they lost their house and decided to take ours instead? With you as their willing accomplice? The pieces were falling into place with sickening clarity. They're family now, Mom. We help each other. Family doesn't manipulate and scheme. Family doesn't force elderly parents into basements. Family doesn't medicate fathers into submission to control their assets. My voice was rising despite my efforts to remain calm. Kevin's face hardened suddenly, a transformation that chilled me. You and Dad are getting older. You need help, whether you want to admit it or not. Allison and I are providing that help, along with her family. If you can't be grateful, at least be practical. Practical? I echoed incredulously. Is it practical to allow your in-laws to take over your parents' home? To let them plan renovations that destroy your father's beloved gardens? To stand by while they host parties with our neighbors and spread lies about my mental competence? They're not lies, Kevin shot back, then immediately looked as if he wished he could retract the words. I stepped back as if slapped. What exactly are you implying? Nothing. He backpedaled quickly. It's just, you've been under stress. Sometimes you forget things, get confused about conversations we've had. I have never been confused. About being told to move to the basement, I said icily. I have never forgotten that this house belongs to your father and me. Kevin's expression turned calculating in a way I'd never seen before. About that, Mom. The deed transfer was completely legal. Dad knew what he was signing. Did he? When he was taking 3 times the prescribed dose of his anxiety medication? A flicker of unease crossed Kevin's face, but he pushed past it. The lawyers will see it differently. Dad was alert enough to manage the business until recently, alert enough to make financial decisions. I studied my son, truly seeing him perhaps for the first time. Who are you? I whispered. What happened to the boy I raised? For just a moment, something like shame crossed his features. Then his expression closed again, becoming the mask I'd grown accustomed to seeing these past months. I'm someone who's thinking about the future, he replied. My future? Allison's future? Our children's future. The house will stay in the family this way. Everything Dad built will continue. Isn't that what you both wanted? Not like this, I said softly. Never like this. The laundry room door opened suddenly, and Allison stood framed in the doorway, her expression suspicious. Kevin? The guests are asking for you. Her eyes darted between us, assessing the situation. I wondered how much she had heard. We're just finishing up, Kevin said, his voice resuming its normal tone as if our conversation had been about nothing more significant than laundry detergent. Your mother should really get some rest, Allison suggested, her voice honey-sweet with concern. These social gatherings can be so taxing at her age. I met her gaze directly. Actually, I'm feeling quite energized, Allison. Amazing what a sense of purpose can do for one's vitality. Something in my tone must have alerted her because her eyes narrowed fractionally. Well, that's wonderful, she said after a slight pause. But perhaps you'd be more comfortable downstairs? The noise can get overwhelming in the main house. I'm perfectly fine where I am, I replied pleasantly. In fact, I think I'll join your guests. It's been too long since I've caught up with the neighbors. Before either of them could protest, I brushed past Allison and headed back toward the living room, where I proceeded to mingle with my neighbors of 25 years, correcting misconceptions about my condition and carefully noting who seemed genuinely concerned versus who appeared to be enjoying the drama. Mrs. Prescott pulled me aside after a few minutes. Martha, dear, are you really all right? When Diane invited us, she implied this was a sort of, well, a transition gathering, to help us understand the new living arrangements. Did she? I kept my voice light. How thoughtful of her to manage my social calendar along with everything else. Mrs. Prescott's eyes widened slightly at my tone. Martha, if you need anything, at all, please call me. David and I have known you and Frank forever. This all seems rather sudden. I squeezed her hand gratefully. It was good to know that not everyone had accepted Diane's version of events without question. The gathering dispersed shortly thereafter, perhaps hastened by my unexpectedly coherent and active participation. As the last guests departed, Diane turned to me with a brittle smile. That was quite unnecessary, Martha, she said coldly, dropping all pretense of concern now that we were alone. These gatherings are stressful for you. On the contrary, I replied. I found it quite illuminating. It's always good to know where one stands with one's neighbors. Richard stepped forward, no longer bothering to mask his irritation. Martha, we're trying to help you and Frank adjust to the new reality here. Your resistance isn't helping anyone, least of all yourself. And what reality is that, Richard? I asked calmly. The one where you lose your home to foreclosure and decide to take over mine instead? His face flushed dark red. Kevin told you? He sputtered, glaring at my son who looked distinctly uncomfortable. He didn't have to, I replied. You've been living here for months without any mention of returning to your own home. Either you're the world's most inconsiderate house guests, or you had nowhere else to go. Given your constant redecorating and renovating, I'm guessing it's the latter. Diane's polished veneer cracked completely. You smug, ungrateful woman, she hissed. We saved your son from financial ruin. We paid off debts you didn't even know existed. Without us, he would have lost the store, the house, everything. And your generous assistance came with the small price tag of my home, my dignity, and my husband's well-being, I observed. How charitable of you. Allison stepped between us, her face a mask of controlled fury. This is exactly why we've had to take matters into our own hands. You're combative, ungrateful, and unable to see what's best for this family. This family, I repeated. You mean your family, Allison. Because from where I stand, what's best? For my family, for Frank and me, hasn't been anyone's priority for quite some time. Mom, that's enough, Kevin interjected, his voice tight. You're upset and you're not thinking clearly. I'm thinking more clearly than I have in months, I countered, and I want to see Frank now. Allison moved to block my path. He's resting. The doctor said, Step aside, Allison, I said quietly, or the next person I speak to will be Adult Protective Services. Her eyes widened in genuine alarm. You wouldn't dare. Try me. For a tense moment, we stood facing each other, neither willing to back down. Then Kevin placed a hand on her arm. Let her go, Allison. It's not worth the fight. With visible reluctance, she stepped aside, allowing me to pass. As I headed toward Frank's room, I heard Richard's angry whisper. This changes nothing. She has no power here anymore. The papers are signed. I pretended not to hear, but those words strengthened my resolve. Whatever they had planned, whatever documents they thought gave them control, they were about to discover that they had severely underestimated Martha Reynolds. Frank was awake when I entered, his eyes clearer than they had been in weeks. I heard raised voices, he said, his voice thin but steady. Are you all right? I sat beside him and took his hand. I'm fine, but we need to talk, and I don't think we have much time. Quickly, I filled him in on everything. My conversation with Michael Carter, Kevin's admission about Richard and Diane's financial situation, the apparent plans they had for our home and assets. Frank listened without interrupting, occasional flashes of his old sharp intelligence lighting his eyes. The garage, he said when I finished. You need to get to those documents tonight. I will, I promised. But first, I need to know, did you knowingly sign papers transferring partial ownership of the house to Kevin? Frank's face darkened with anger. Absolutely not. He brought me some papers about the store, at least that's what he said they were. Something about updated insurance requirements. I was having a bad day. The medication makes everything fuzzy. His hand clenched into a weak fist on the bedspread. I trusted him, Martha. He's our son. The betrayal in his voice broke my heart. I know, sweetheart. I trusted him too. What happens now? He asked, suddenly looking every one of his 70 years. Now I fight back, I said simply. For both of us. Frank squeezed my hand with surprising strength. Be careful. They're desperate people, Martha. Desperate people do desperate things. I nodded, understanding the warning all too well. The confrontation in the living room had confirmed what I'd suspected. Richard and Diane had lost everything and were clinging to our home as their salvation. They wouldn't give it up without a fight. I need to check your medication, I said, moving to the small table where Allison kept his pills neatly arranged in labeled containers. I think they've been adjusting your dosages. Frank nodded weakly. The blue ones make me sleep. Sometimes there are more of them than I remember the doctor prescribing. I examined the pill organizer, noting the various medications and quantities. Then I took out my phone and silently photographed everything, including the prescription labels. If they were over-medicating Frank to keep him compliant, I now had evidence. A soft knock at the door made us both tense. It opened to reveal Brian, Allison's brother, looking uncomfortable. Sorry to interrupt, he said, not meeting my eyes. Allison asked me to check if Frank needed anything. He's fine, I replied coldly. I'm with him. Brian nodded, still avoiding eye contact. Right. Good. I'll just... He gestured vaguely behind him and began to retreat. Wait, I said suddenly. Something about his demeanor, the discomfort, the reluctance, struck me as different from the entitled confidence his parents displayed. Brian, can I ask you something? He hesitated in the doorway, glancing nervously down the hall as if afraid of being observed. I guess so. How long have your parents known they were losing their house? His eyes darted to Frank, then back to me. I shouldn't be talking about this. Please, I said softly. We need to understand what's happening to our home. Brian ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so similar to Kevin's that it momentarily threw me. They knew for over a year, he finally admitted. The foreclosure process was already started when Allison and Kevin got engaged. Dad was hoping to fight it, but... He shrugged helplessly. Too much debt. Bad investments. When they found out about this place, paid off, plenty of room, it seemed like the perfect solution. For them, I observed, not for us. He had the grace to look ashamed. Look, I'm just here because Jennifer and I are between places too. I didn't sign up for. He gestured vaguely around him. All this, the way they're treating you guys, it's not right. Frank's eyes had sharpened with interest. If you feel that way, why stay silent? Brian shifted uncomfortably. It's complicated. Family loyalty, you know? And we do need a place to stay. But watching what's happening to you two. He shook his head. It doesn't sit right. Never has. A potential ally, I thought, with growing hope. Or at least someone with a conscience. Brian, I said carefully, if things came to a legal confrontation, would you be willing to tell the truth about what you've witnessed here? His eyes widened in alarm. I don't want to get involved in any lawsuits. Even if it meant stopping elder abuse, I pressed. Because that's what this is, Brian. Your sister and parents are systematically isolating us, medicating Frank unnecessarily, and attempting to take financial control of our assets. That's abuse, plain and simple. He paled visibly. I didn't think of it that way. Would you testify if needed? Frank asked directly, his voice surprisingly strong. Not against your sister or parents specifically, but simply to what you've observed? Brian looked torn, his loyalty to his family clearly warring with his sense of right and wrong. Finally, he nodded slightly. If it came to that? Yeah, I guess I would. It's not right, what they're doing. Thank you, I said sincerely. That means more than you know. He nodded again, then glanced nervously over his shoulder. I should go, they'll wonder where I am. After he left, Frank and I exchanged hopeful glances. A crack in their united front, Frank observed. Possibly, I agreed. But let's not count on it too heavily. Brian may have a conscience, but family pressure is powerful. Frank's eyes began to droop, the medication in his system gradually overcoming his determination to stay alert. The garage, he murmured. Again. Tonight. The documents. I'll get them, I promised, squeezing his hand. Rest now. Save your strength. As he drifted into sleep, I sat beside him, planning my next moves carefully. I would need to retrieve those documents, contact Michael again, and begin building our case. But I also needed to be extremely careful. If Allison and her parents realized I was taking legal action, they might escalate their efforts to control us, possibly even restricting my access to Frank completely. This would require strategy, patience, and perfect timing. Fortunately, those were skills I'd been honing for 62 years. They thought I was a helpless old woman they could push aside and manipulate at will. They were about to discover just how wrong they were. I waited until 3 a.m. to make my move. The house had finally fallen silent around midnight, but I gave it extra time to ensure everyone was deeply asleep. In the weeks since my exile to the basement, I'd learned the rhythms of the household. Richard's rumbling snores that started precisely 30 minutes after he turned off his bedside lamp. Diane's habit of getting up once around 1 a.m. for water. Kevin and Allison's late-night television watching that typically ended around 11:30. The basement stairs creaked, so I avoided them entirely, slipping out through the exterior door that led directly to the backyard. The April night was chilly, and my thin robe offered little protection against the brisk wind, but I couldn't risk putting on shoes or a coat that might make noise. In my stocking feet, I padded across the damp grass, wincing as the cold seeped through to my skin. Frank's workshop. He never called it a garage, insisting that where he created was more than a place to park cars, stood separate from the house, a small outbuilding he'd constructed himself when Kevin was still in elementary school. It had been his sanctuary, a place where he retreated to build furniture, repair broken household items, and teach our son the value of working with his hands. I hadn't been inside in months. After Frank's heart attack, Richard had claimed the space, reorganizing tools and materials to his liking despite my protests. Now, as I approached the familiar door, I realized with a jolt that a new padlock secured it, one I didn't have the key for. My heart sank. Of course they would have. Locked it. They'd been methodically securing their control over every inch of our property, every aspect of our lives. Why would Frank's desk be any different? For a moment, I stood frozen in indecision, the cold seeping into my bones. Then I remembered something. The window on the north side. The one Frank had always complained about needing to fix because it didn't latch properly. Moving carefully around the building, I found it exactly as I remembered. A small, square pane that opened into the area where Frank kept his woodworking. Supplies. I tested it gently with my fingertips, and sure enough, it swung open with minimal resistance. The opening was small, designed for ventilation rather than entry, but I was slender, and desperation made me determined. With considerable effort and a few painful scrapes along my sides, I managed to wriggle through the narrow space, dropping awkwardly onto a workbench below. The interior was pitch black, but I didn't dare turn on a light. Instead, I pulled out my phone, using its faint glow to navigate through the transformed space. Richard had indeed made changes. Frank's carefully organized tools now hung in different arrangements. The woodworking area had been converted to storage for boxes labeled Parker Family, and a thick layer of dust covered the lathe Frank had once used daily. The desk, thankfully, remained in its original corner, though it too had been repurposed, its surface cluttered with Richard's golf magazines and receipts. I moved toward it with purpose, my hands shaking slightly as I pulled open the bottom drawer. It stuck part way, and for a terrifying moment, I thought they might have discovered Frank's hiding spot and emptied it. But a harder tug revealed the cause. Richard had simply stuffed the drawer with his own paperwork, making it difficult to open fully. I removed the excess items, careful to note their original positions so I could replace them exactly. Then, felt along the back of the drawer. My fingers found what they were searching for, a slight ridge that didn't belong, a small imperfection in the otherwise smooth wood. Frank had always been meticulous in his craftsmanship, which meant this irregularity was intentional. I pressed gently, then with more pressure, and was rewarded with a soft click. The false bottom lifted on hidden hinges, revealing a shallow compartment beneath. Inside lay several manila envelopes, neatly labeled in Frank's precise handwriting. Deed and property, wills and trusts, insurance, financial accounts, and one simply marked private. I gathered them all, my hands trembling slightly with a mixture of relief and anticipation. Whatever game Kevin and the Parkers thought they were playing, I now held the original documentation that might unravel their plans. As I carefully replaced the false bottom and reorganized the drawer to its previous disheveled state, a sound from outside froze me in place. Footsteps on gravel, approaching the workshop. I quickly switched off my phone light and crouched behind the desk, clutching the precious envelopes to my chest, hardly daring to breathe. The padlock rattled, followed by the unmistakable sound of a key turning in the lock. The door creaked open, and a beam of flashlight swept across the room. Coming. Dangerously close to where I hid. Hello? Kevin's voice, thick with sleep but alert enough to be dangerous. Is someone in here? I remained perfectly still, my heart pounding so loudly I was certain he must hear it. The flashlight beam passed within inches of my feet, then moved away, sweeping across workbenches and tools. Probably just raccoons again, he muttered to himself after a minute of silence. There was a pause, then the sound of something being set down on a surface, glass clinking against wood. I risked the slightest movement, peering around the edge of the desk just enough to see Kevin placing a half-empty whiskey tumbler on Frank's old workbench. He stood there for a long moment, shoulders slumped, rubbing his face with both hands in a gesture of exhaustion or despair. I couldn't tell which. Then he picked up something small from the bench, a wooden toy car I recognized instantly. Frank had made it for Kevin's 5th birthday, a perfect miniature replica of the classic Mustang my son had been obsessed with as a child. Kevin turned it over in his hands, running his fingers along the smooth edges, the carefully crafted wheels. In the dim light of his flashlight, I could see his expression. Not the cold, calculating mask I'd grown accustomed to these past months, but something softer, sadder. For a heartbeat, I glimpsed my boy again, the son I'd raised, not the stranger who'd betrayed us. "What the hell am I doing?" he whispered to the empty room, or perhaps to the toy in his hands. The question hung in the air, unanswered. Part of me wanted to emerge from my hiding place then, to confront him in this moment of apparent vulnerability. But instinct kept me frozen, warning that sentiment might be a luxury I couldn't afford right now. I needed those documents safely in Michael Carter's hands before making any moves that might alert Kevin or the Parkers to my plans. After another minute, Kevin tucked the wooden car into his pocket, picked up his whiskey, and with a heavy sigh, headed back to the door. The beam of his flashlight swept the room once more, then disappeared as the door closed behind him. The lock clicked into place, and his footsteps gradually faded into the night. I waited a full 5 minutes before moving, counting seconds in my head the way I'd taught Kevin to do when he was afraid of thunderstorms as a child. Then, clutching my precious cargo, I made my way back to the window, carefully eased myself out, and retraced my steps across the yard to the basement entrance. Safe in my converted apartment, I spread the envelopes on the small table that served as my dining and workspace. The first one I opened, Deed and Property, contained exactly what I hoped. The original deed to our home, showing Frank and me as sole owners, along with all supporting documentation of our mortgage payments, the final satisfaction of loan, certificate and property tax records for the past decade. The envelope marked Wills and Trusts revealed our most recent will, executed just 3 years earlier, leaving everything equally to Kevin, but with specific provisions about our continued residence in the home for our lifetimes. There was also a living trust document, something I'd forgotten about, establishing parameters for managing our assets should either of us become incapacitated. The trust named Kevin as successor trustee, but with explicit instructions that we were to remain in our home with appropriate in-home care if needed. The financial accounts envelope contained statements from our retirement funds, bank accounts, and investment portfolios, all showing healthy balances that explained the Parkers' interest in taking control. Frank had always been conservative, with money, saving diligently and investing wisely throughout our working years. We weren't wealthy by Riverdale standards, but we were comfortable, with resources that would support us through our retirement and still leave a respectable inheritance. For Kevin, the insurance envelope held policies for the house, cars, and Frank's life insurance. Substantial policy he'd maintained since Kevin's birth. There was also a long-term care policy I'd insisted we purchase when we turned 60, which would cover in-home health care if either of us needed it. A document that directly contradicted the narrative that I couldn't care for Frank properly. Finally, I opened the envelope marked Private. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a handwritten letter from Frank dated just 3 weeks after his heart attack. My eyes filled with tears as I read his familiar handwriting, shakier than usual, but still distinctly his. My dearest Martha, if you're reading this, you've discovered that something is wrong with how our affairs are being managed. I've been having moments of clarity between the fog of medication, and I'm increasingly concerned about Kevin's behavior and the influence Allison and her family seem to have over him. Yesterday, I overheard a conversation between Richard and Diane about securing their position once they have control. I'm not certain what they're planning, but I trust my instincts, and they're telling me that our son is being manipulated into actions that aren't in our best interest. I've hidden these documents as a precaution. If necessary, contact Howard Greenwood. He's retired now, but his son-in-law Michael Carter has taken over the practice. They have copies of our most important papers and will know how to protect our interests and, just as importantly, protect Kevin from making irreversible mistakes. Remember our vows, in sickness and in health, for better or worse. Whatever happens, know that my love for you has never wavered, not for a single day of our 40 years together. All my love, forever, Frank. The letter blurred through my tears. Even weakened and ill, Frank had been thinking ahead, protecting us both, aware on some level of the manipulation happening around him. His foresight had given me the tools I now needed to fight back. I carefully photographed every document with my phone, creating digital backups that I immediately emailed to myself and to Michael Carter with a brief explanatory note. Then I resealed the originals in their envelopes and considered where to hide them. The basement offered few secure options. Allison tidied my space regularly, an invasion of privacy thinly disguised as helpfulness. Finally, I decided on the eye. One place they were unlikely to search, inside the lining of my old suitcase, stored under the pull-out couch. I carefully created a slit in the fabric, tucked the envelopes deep inside, and stitched it closed with the small sewing kit I kept, for mending. By the time I finished, dawn was breaking, pale light filtering through the small basement windows. I crawled into bed exhausted, but filled with a renewed sense of purpose. For the first time in months, I felt like I had some control again, some leverage in this silent war being waged in my own home. With documentary evidence safely duplicated and hidden, I could proceed with the legal countermeasures Michael had outlined. Sleep claimed me quickly, but it seemed I had barely closed my eyes when a sharp knock on my door jolted me awake. "Martha?" Diane's voice, falsely sweet. "Are you ill? It's nearly 11 and you're never in bed this late." I sat up groggily, disoriented by the bright sunlight now streaming through the windows. "I'm fine," I called back, my voice rusty with sleep. "Just tired. I'll be up shortly." "Well, hurry along," she replied, the sweetness evaporating. "The contractors are here to discuss the renovations, and since these changes directly affect your accommodations, you should probably be present." My heart rate accelerated. "What renovations?" There was a pause. "Kevin didn't tell you? We're updating the basement, making it more appropriate for long-term occupancy." "Long-term?" I repeated, a chill running through me despite the warmth of my bed. "Yes. Well, Frank's condition isn't improving as quickly as we'd hoped. The doctor thinks the current arrangements could be permanent." Her voice dripped with false sympathy. "The good news is, we're upgrading your space. Proper walls instead of these temporary dividers, a real kitchen rather than just a microwave and mini-fridge. You should be very comfortable." The message was clear. They were cementing my exile to the basement, creating a permanent separate apartment that would further isolate me from Frank and the main house. They were establishing new physical boundaries to reinforce the narrative that this arrangement was for my benefit, for my comfort. "How thoughtful," I managed to reply, keeping my tone neutral. "I'll be up in a few minutes." "Don't dawdle," she admonished, footsteps already retreating up the stairs. "The contractors charge by the hour." I dressed quickly, my mind racing. This was an escalation I hadn't anticipated, at least not so soon. Were they responding to my confrontation yesterday? Had Kevin noticed something amiss in the workshop? Or was this simply the next phase in their gradual takeover, a plan that had been in motion all along? Whatever the reason, I needed to contact Michael immediately. If they were physically altering the house to permanently relegate me to the basement, time was running out faster than I'd realized. Upstairs, I found a scene that confirmed my worst fears. The main living room had been transformed into an impromptu conference room, with blueprints spread across the coffee table and 3 men in work clothes gesturing at various features. Kevin, Allison, Richard, and Diane stood around them, pointing and nodding with the comfortable authority of people making decisions about their own property. "Ah, Martha," Richard greeted me with exaggerated cheer. "Finally awake! Come see the plans. We're making significant improvements to your living quarters." I approached slowly, taking in the detailed drawings. What they called improvements was in reality a complete separation. A self-contained apartment with its own entrance, effectively cutting me off from the main house entirely. There would be a locked door at the top of the basement stairs, accessible only from the main house side. "Why the locked door?" I asked, pointing to the feature. Kevin at least had the grace to look uncomfortable. "It's a safety precaution, Mom. The contractor suggested it in case. Well, in case you get confused at night and try to go upstairs, we wouldn't want you falling." "I've never fallen on those stairs," I said evenly. "Not once in 25 years. Prevention is better than cure," Diane chirped, not meeting my eyes. "Besides, you'll have your own private entrance. You won't need to use those steep stairs at all." One of the contractors, a middle-aged man with kind eyes, looked between us with growing discomfort. "Ma'am," he said, addressing me directly, "are you on board with these changes? Because it seems like there might be some communication issues here." Before I could respond, Richard clapped the man on the shoulder. "Family discussions, you know how it goes. Martha's been resistant to change since her husband's illness, but this is truly what's best for everyone." "For everyone or for you?" I asked quietly. An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. The contractors exchanged glances, clearly sensing the tension. "Perhaps we should continue this another time," the lead contractor suggested diplomatically, "when everyone's had a chance to review the plans thoroughly." "That won't be necessary," Allison said firmly. "We've already discussed this extensively as a family. The project is approved and we'd like to move forward immediately." The contractor looked to me again, his expression troubled. "Ma'am?" I met his gaze directly. "I do not approve these renovations. This is my home, and I have not agreed to any of these changes." Kevin stepped forward, his voice low and warning. "Mom, we've been through this. The decisions have been made. Please don't make a scene in front of our guests." "I'm not making a scene," I replied calmly. "I'm stating a fact. I do not consent to these changes to my home." The lead contractor closed his portfolio with a decisive snap. "I think we should reschedule when there's more clarity about the homeowner's wishes. We don't get involved in family disputes." He nodded to his colleagues who began gathering their materials with evident relief. "There's no dispute," Richard insisted, his voice rising. "The deed has been transferred. Kevin has legal authority to approve these renovations." The contractor paused, looking uncertain again. "Is that true, ma'am?" I thought quickly. If I revealed our legal challenge now, they would know I had accessed the original documents and possibly take steps to prevent me from building my case further. But if I said nothing, the renovations might proceed despite my objections. "My husband and I are the legal owners of this house," I said carefully. "Any transfer of deed that may have occurred is currently subject to legal review." Kevin's face darkened. "Mom, that's not true, and you know it." "Actually, Kevin, it is true. And I believe the contractors would prefer not to be dragged into a potential legal situation." I turned to the men. "I'm sure you understand." The lead contractor nodded firmly. "We absolutely do. We'll need to see clear legal documentation that all parties with interest in the property have approved these renovations before we proceed." He handed his business card to Kevin. "Call us when you've sorted this out." As they left, a stunned silence fell over the room. I had won this particular skirmish, but the war was far from over. The look Richard gave me was pure venom. "You've just made a serious mistake," he said, his voice low and threatening. "The mistake," I replied evenly, "was thinking I would stand by while you turned my home into a prison." "It's for your own good," Diane insisted, her carefully maintained composure cracking. "Frank needs specialized care. You need supervision." "I need nothing of the sort," I interrupted. "What I need is to be treated with dignity in my own home and for my husband to receive appropriate care. not over-medication designed to keep him compliant with your plans. Kevin stepped between us. Mom, this isn't helping anyone. Why can't you just accept that things need to change? Because the changes being made aren't for my benefit or for Frank's, I replied, looking my son directly in the eye. They're for you and the Parkers. You're systematically taking over our home, our finances, and our lives while pushing us to the margins. That's not true, Allison protested, but her voice lacked conviction. Isn't it? I challenged. You moved your entire family in without warning. You relegated me to the basement. You've taken over every inch of living space, redecorated to your taste, planned renovations to my garden, hosted parties with my neighbors, and now you want to literally seal me off with a locked door. I shook my head slowly. No. This ends now. And how exactly do you plan to stop it? Richard asked, his tone mocking. The deed transfer is complete. Kevin has power of attorney for Frank's healthcare decisions. You have no leverage, Martha. None. I met his gaze steadily. We'll see about that. Before anyone could respond, the doorbell rang. Allison moved to answer it, clearly relieved for the interruption. A moment later, she returned with a puzzled expression. It's someone named Michael Carter, she said. He says he has an appointment with you, Martha. Richard and Diane exchanged alarmed glances. Kevin's face drained of color. Perfect timing, I said calmly. Please show him in. Michael Carter entered the room with the confident bearing of someone completely at ease in confrontational situations. In his early 40s, with a trim build and alert eyes that missed nothing, he carried a sleek leather portfolio and wore a suit that even Richard's critical gaze couldn't find fault with. Mrs. Reynolds, he greeted me warmly, shaking my hand. Thank you for the documents you sent this morning. They were most illuminating. From the corner of my eye, I saw Kevin's expression shift from confusion to alarm. Good. Let him wonder exactly what I'd discovered and shared. Everyone, this is Michael Carter from Greenwood & Associates. I introduced him with deliberate formality. Michael, this is my son Kevin, his wife Allison, and her parents Richard and Diane Parker. Michael nodded professionally to each person, but didn't offer to shake hands. I understand there's been some confusion regarding property, ownership, and healthcare decisions in this household, he said, his tone pleasant but firm. I'm here to help clarify the legal standing of all parties involved. There's no confusion, Richard blustered. The deed has been transferred, all perfectly legal. Michael smiled thinly. That's precisely what we need to discuss. Mrs. Reynolds has shared some concerning information regarding the circumstances under which certain documents were signed. This is a private family matter, Allison interjected. We don't need lawyers involved. On the contrary, Michael replied. When there are questions about undue influence, potential fraudulent transfers, and possible medical neglect, legal clarity becomes essential. He turned to me. Mrs. Reynolds, perhaps we should speak privately? And I'd like to see Mr. Reynolds as well, if possible. Of course, I agreed. Frank is in the den, this way. As I led Michael toward Frank's room, Kevin stepped in front of us, his face pale but determined. Mom, what are you doing? We can talk about this as a family. We don't need outsiders involved. I looked at my son, truly looked at him, and saw not just the man who had betrayed us, but also the boy I had raised, now trapped in a web partly of his own making. For a moment, I hesitated, wondering if there was still a way to salvage this situation without legal warfare. Kevin, I said softly, this hasn't been a family discussion for months. It's been a systematic takeover. I've tried talking. I've tried reasoning. I've tried appealing to your better nature. None of it worked. I straightened my shoulders. So now we do this my way. I stepped around him and continued toward Frank's room, Michael close behind me. Behind us, I could hear Richard's angry whispers and Allison's higher-pitched responses, the sounds of a family realizing their plans were unraveling. What I couldn't have anticipated was what would happen next, a confrontation that would permanently change the course of this battle in ways none of us could have foreseen. As Michael and I entered Frank's room, I was immediately struck by how alert my husband looked. He was sitting up in his bed, his reading glasses perched on his nose, a newspaper spread across his lap. For the first time in weeks, his eyes were clear and focused, his expression engaged rather than distant. "Frank?" I said, unable to keep the surprise from my voice. "You're looking well today." He glanced up, a small smile playing at the corner of his mouth. Funny thing about that. My morning medication seemed to have gone missing. Allison was quite flustered about it, but I assured her I felt fine without it. I exchanged a look with Michael, whose raised eyebrow communicated volumes. Frank's improved condition without his usual medication was compelling evidence of the overmedication we suspected. "Frank, this is Michael Carter, Howard Greenwood's son-in-law. He's here to help us." Frank nodded, extending a hand that was steadier than I'd seen in months. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Carter. I was hoping Martha would contact you." "Please, call me Michael," he replied, shaking Frank's hand. "I'm glad to see you alert and oriented. It will make our conversation much more productive." Frank's expression turned serious. "I'm guessing from the raised voices I heard that the family isn't taking this development well?" "That's putting it mildly," I said, pulling a chair close to his bed while Michael took a seat by the window, discreetly positioning himself to watch both the door and us. They were in the middle of arranging basement renovations to permanently seal me off from the rest of the house when Michael arrived. Frank's face darkened with anger. "They're moving faster than I anticipated. Did you find the documents?" "I did," I confirmed, glancing at Michael. "They're safely duplicated and in Michael's possession now." Michael nodded. "Based on what I've reviewed so far, we have strong grounds to contest the deed transfer on the basis of diminished capacity and undue influence. The living trust document is particularly helpful since it clearly outlines your wishes regarding your care and residence." Frank leaned forward intently. "What about Kevin's power of attorney for my healthcare decisions? Is that valid?" "That depends," Michael replied. "When exactly did you sign it, and what was your medical condition at the time?" Frank's brow furrowed in concentration. "About 2 months ago, I had pneumonia as a complication from the heart attack. I was on several medications, including something for anxiety that made me extremely drowsy. Kevin brought paperwork he said was for emergency medical decisions if I took a turn for the worse." His expression hardened. I trusted my son. Michael made a note in his portfolio. "And have you seen a copy of what you actually signed?" "No," Frank admitted. "Every time I've asked to review my medical information, Allison changes the subject, or tells me I'll just confuse myself." "Classic isolation tactic," Michael observed, making another note. "Restricting access to personal medical information is a red flag for elder abuse." The door opened suddenly, and Kevin stood there, his face tight with barely controlled anger. Behind him, I could see Allison and her parents hovering in the hallway, clearly trying to listen. "This has gone far. Enough," Kevin announced. "Whatever you're planning, it needs to stop. You're upsetting Dad and disrupting this household." "On the contrary," Michael replied smoothly. "Your father appears quite lucid and is exercising his right to understand his legal and medical situation." Kevin's gaze darted to Frank, and I saw a flicker of surprise cross his face at his father's alert appearance. "Dad needs rest, not legal consultations. His doctor has been very clear about limiting stress." "Which doctor might that be?" Michael asked innocently. "The one who prescribed the medication regimen that seems to keep him disoriented much of the time? I'd very much like to speak with this physician directly." Kevin's expression faltered. That's not your concern. Family medical decisions are made by the patient when they're competent to do so, Michael interrupted firmly. And Mr. Reynolds appears quite competent at the moment. Frank straightened in his bed, his voice stronger than I'd heard in months. Kevin, I want to see all the documents I've signed since my heart attack. Every last one of them. Now. A tense silence filled the room. Kevin's gaze shifted from his father to me to Michael, then back to Frank. Dad, you're not thinking clearly. He tried again. You're having a good morning, but that doesn't mean... It means, Frank interrupted, that I'm well enough to understand what's happening in my own home and with my own care. Documents, Kevin. All of them. Or Mr. Carter here will have to obtain them through legal channels, which I'm sure would be much more complicated. For everyone. Richard pushed past Kevin into the room, his face flushed with anger. This is ridiculous. You're letting this interfering woman manipulate you, Frank, after everything we've done to help your family. Help? Frank's eyebrows shot up. Is that what you call moving into our home, taking over our bedroom, relegating my wife to the basement, and keeping me sedated? Interesting definition of help you have there, Richard. Richard took a step forward, his finger jabbing in Frank's direction. We saved your son from financial ruin. If it wasn't for us... Dad! Allison hissed from the doorway, cutting him off with a warning glare. Too late. Michael's interest was visibly piqued. Financial ruin? That sounds relevant to our discussion of potential undue influence. Please, Mr. Parker, do elaborate. Richard's mouth snapped shut, but the damage was done. Frank turned to Kevin, his expression a mixture of confusion and dawning comprehension. Financial ruin? He repeated quietly. Kevin, what is he talking about? Kevin shot a venomous look at Richard before turning back to his father. His shoulders slumped slightly, the first crack in his defensive posture. It's complicated, Dad. I have time, Frank replied evenly. In fact, it seems I have nothing but time these days. Kevin ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so reminiscent of Frank that it made my heart ache despite everything. The hardware store. It wasn't doing as well as you thought. Hasn't been for almost 2 years now. Frank's eyes widened. What are you talking about? The quarterly reports you showed me. We're adjusted, Kevin admitted, not meeting his father's gaze. I didn't want you to worry. You've always been so proud of the store, and when competition from the big box retailers started hitting us hard, I thought I could turn things around without bothering you. I stared at my son in disbelief. Kevin, why didn't you come to us? We could have helped. Because I was supposed to be the successful son, he burst out, his composure finally cracking. The one who took over the family business and made it even better. Not the failure who ran it into the ground after Dad spent 40 years building it up. Frank's expression softened slightly. So, the store is losing money. Kevin's gaze dropped to the floor. Was losing money. A lot of it. I took out loans, tried marketing campaigns, even expanded our product lines. Nothing worked. Then I started using personal credit to keep things afloat, thinking it was just temporary. His voice dropped. By the time I met Allison, I was nearly $200,000 in debt, and the store was still hemorrhaging money. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. Our son had been drowning financially for years and had never said a word. And the Parkers helped you? Frank asked, his voice carefully neutral. Kevin nodded, some of his defensiveness returning. Richard had business connections. He arranged refinancing, negotiated with creditors, found ways to restructure the debt. Without him, I would have lost everything. The store, our house, everything. In exchange for what? Michael asked quietly. Kevin's gaze darted to him, then away. Nothing formal, just family helping family. Family helping family. Diane echoed from the doorway, her voice sickly sweet. That's all this has ever been. We saw Kevin struggling and stepped in to help, the way loving parents do. Michael smiled thinly. And your assistance just happened to coincide with your own foreclosure issues. Purely coincidental timing? The silence that followed was damning. Frank looked between Kevin and the Parkers, his expression hardening as understanding dawned. So that's it, he said quietly. They saved you from financial ruin, and in exchange, you gave them our home. No, Kevin protested. It wasn't like that. They needed a place to stay temporarily, and we had all this room. It made sense for everyone. They could help with your care. We could consolidate expenses. Everyone would benefit. Except, I pointed out, that there was nothing temporary about their stay. And somehow, Frank and I went from homeowners to unwelcome guests in our own house. Richard stepped forward, apparently deciding that denial was no longer the best strategy. Let's be honest with each other, he said, his tone suddenly businesslike. Kevin was in serious financial trouble that could have cost you this house anyway if his creditors came after family assets. We stepped in and stabilized the situation. By taking over our home and isolating us from each other, Frank challenged. By creating a sustainable living arrangement for everyone, Richard countered smoothly. Your health requires constant care that Martha simply can't provide. The basement apartment gives her independence while ensuring you get the attention you need. The attention I need, Frank repeated incredulously, or the sedation you prefer? Because I notice I'm thinking much more clearly today without my usual morning medication. Allison flushed slightly, but maintained her composure. Your medication regimen was prescribed by Dr. Winters. If you're feeling different today, I should really call him. Dr. Winters, Michael interjected, is the physician you selected after Mr. Reynolds's regular doctor of 15 years was suddenly changed, correct? I'd be very interested to review how that transition occurred and who authorized it. Kevin's expression grew alarmed. This is getting out of hand. We don't need lawyers dissecting every family decision. I think we do, Frank said firmly, especially when those family decisions seem to involve drugging me into compliance and pushing your mother into the basement. Diane stepped fully into the room now, her practiced mask of concern firmly in place. Frank, sweetheart, you're getting worked up, and that's not good for your heart. Why don't we all take a step back and discuss this when you're feeling calmer? I'm perfectly calm, Frank replied, his voice steady. And I'm perfectly capable of making my own decisions, which seem to have been denied to me for some time now. No one has denied you anything, Richard insisted. Everything we've done has been for the good of this family, including Kevin and his future. Ah, Michael said, making a note in his portfolio. That's an interesting statement. Would you care to elaborate on how transferring property from the elder Mr. and Mrs. Reynolds benefits them, rather than primarily benefiting Kevin and by extension yourselves? Richard's face darkened. I don't have to justify myself to you. Perhaps not to me, Michael agreed pleasantly, but possibly to a judge, should we need to pursue this matter in court. Elder abuse and financial exploitation are taken very seriously these days. The word court seemed to land like a bomb in the room. Kevin paled visibly, while Allison's hand flew to her throat in alarm. Nobody is going to court, she said quickly. This is a family matter that we can resolve ourselves. Michael glanced at me, then at Frank, clearly leaving the response to us. Frank reached for my hand, squeezing it gently before addressing the room. I'm afraid it's gone beyond that, he said quietly. Trust has been broken here. Broken badly. Kevin, you should have come to us when the store was struggling. We would have helped you without demanding control of our lives in return. Kevin's eyes glistened with what might have been tears. Dad, And as for the rest of you, Frank continued, his gaze sweeping over the Parkers. Whatever financial assistance you provided to my son does not entitle you to my home, my wife's dignity, or my conscious awareness. That ends today. A tense silence fell over the room. I could almost see the calculations happening behind Richard's eyes as he assessed the changing power dynamics. "What exactly are you proposing?" he finally asked, his tone cautious. Michael stepped in smoothly. "My clients are offering a reasonable transition. You'll have 30 days to find alternative housing and remove yourselves from this property. During that time, there will be no changes to the current living spaces, no adjustments to Mr. Reynolds' medication without approval from his original physician, and Mrs. Reynolds will have full access to all areas of the home and to her husband." 30 days? Diane's voice rose in disbelief. "That's impossible. Where are we supposed to go?" "That's not my client's concern," Michael replied evenly. "You've had months to address your housing situation. 30 days is generous under the circumstances." Richard's face had turned an alarming shade of red. "And if we refuse? That deed transfer is legal. Kevin has rights to this property now." "A transfer we're prepared to challenge based on diminished capacity and undue influence," Michael countered, "along with potential claims for elder abuse, medical neglect, and financial exploitation. Would you prefer to resolve this quietly or through protracted legal proceedings that might involve adult protective services and possibly criminal charges?" The threat hung in the air. Kevin looked like he might be ill, while Allison's composure had completely crumbled. Richard and Diane exchanged glances, some unspoken communication passing between them. "We need to discuss this privately," Richard finally said. "As a family." Michael nodded agreeably. "Of course. I'll wait outside while you confer." He stood, straightening his suit jacket. "But I should mention, my clients will not be separated during these discussions. Where Mrs. Reynolds goes, I go, and she stays with her husband." It was a clear message. The divide-and-conquer tactics they had employed for months would no longer work. The united front of Frank, myself, and our legal representation had changed the game entirely. Once outside in the hallway with the door closed, I leaned against the wall, suddenly exhausted. "Do you think they'll agree to the terms?" Michael considered this. "They're cornered, and they know it. The question is whether they'll try to negotiate better terms or risk going to court." He glanced at me. "How far are you willing to push this?" "As far as necessary," I said without hesitation. "They've taken enough from us already." He nodded, satisfied with my resolve. "Then we hold firm. 30 days, no renovations, no medication changes, full access for you." Inside the room, we could hear raised voices, Richard's angry declarations, Allison's higher-pitched protests, and Kevin's responses, too muffled to make out clearly. After about 10 minutes, the door opened again, and Kevin emerged alone, his expression grim but determined. "I need to speak with my parents," he said quietly. "Alone." Michael raised an eyebrow. "As I mentioned, not with you," Kevin interrupted. "Just them. My wife and her family will wait elsewhere." I exchanged a glance with Michael, who gave a small nod. Whatever Kevin wanted to say, it might be our best chance at a resolution. That didn't involve courts and public exposure of our family's troubles. "All right," I agreed cautiously. "But Frank's medication stays as it is today. None of the usual doses that keep him sedated." Kevin nodded stiffly. "Agreed." As we re-entered the room, the Parkers filed out, Diane shooting me a venomous glance while Richard maintained a stony silence. Allison lingered in the doorway, her hand on Kevin's arm. "Are you sure about this?" she asked him, her voice low but urgent. "Yes," he replied firmly. "This has gone far enough." She hesitated, then nodded once before following her parents down the hall. Once they were gone, Kevin closed the door and turned to face us. Frank had moved to sit on the edge of the bed, and I took a seat beside him, our shoulders touching in a silent show of unity. Kevin remained standing, his posture stiff, his expression conflicted. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then he took a deep breath and said the last words I expected to hear. "I'm sorry." The simple declaration hung in the air between us. Not excuses, not justifications, not defensive arguments. Just a straightforward acknowledgement of wrongdoing. "I've been weak," he continued, his voice rough with emotion. "Weak and cowardly and selfish. What started as accepting help from Allison's family turned into something I never intended, but I let it happen because it was easier than standing up to them." Frank's hand found mine, squeezing gently. "What exactly did you agree to, son?" he asked, his tone more sad than angry now. Kevin sank into the chair by the window, suddenly looking exhausted. "At first, it really was just about saving the store and restructuring my debt. Richard has connections in finance, and he made deals happen that I couldn't on my own. Then when you had your heart attack..." He trailed off, swallowing hard. "Everything happened so fast. Richard suggested they stay with us temporarily. To help with your care. It made sense at the time." "And?" I prompted when he fell silent again. "And then it just escalated." Richard and Diane started talking about permanent arrangements, about how much sense it made for everyone to live together as a family. When I hesitated, Richard reminded me how much I still owed him, not just gratitude, but actual money he'd personally loaned to cover some of my debts. "So he leveraged your financial obligations to pressure you into giving them our home," Frank said softly. Kevin nodded miserably. "The deed transfer was Richard's idea. He said it would protect the family assets if my business troubles got worse. He made it sound reasonable. You'd still live here. Nothing would really change. It was just paperwork to ensure the house stayed in the family." "But things did change," I pointed out. "Dramatically." "I know," Kevin admitted, unable to meet my eyes. "Once the deed was signed, everything shifted. Suddenly it wasn't your house anymore. It was our family home, with Richard and Diane making all the decisions. When you objected, Mom, Allison, and her mother started suggesting you were confused and struggling to adjust to the changes." "And the basement?" I asked, unable to keep the hurt from my voice. Kevin's face flushed with shame. "Their idea. They said it would give you independence while allowing them to manage Dad's care more efficiently." His voice dropped to a near whisper. I knew it was wrong. Every step of the way I knew, but I kept telling myself it was temporary, that once the financial situation stabilized, things would go back to normal. "And my medication?" Frank asked. "The doses that keep me barely conscious most days?" Kevin's expression crumpled. "Allison handles all that. She told me the doctor had prescribed sedatives to keep you calm and reduce stress on your heart. I didn't question it. I didn't want to question it, because deep down, I knew something wasn't right." The admission hung in the air between us, raw and painful. My son had allowed his parents to be mistreated, manipulated, and marginalized, partly out of financial desperation, partly out of weakness, and partly out of willful blindness to what was happening right in front of him. "What changed?" I finally asked. "Why come to us now with this apology?" Kevin looked up, his eyes reddened. "Last night in Dad's workshop, I heard something and went to check, thinking it might be raccoons again. While I was there, I found that wooden car, the one Dad made for my 5th birthday." His voice caught. I remembered how proud I was of that toy, how I'd tell everyone, "My dad made this just for me." And suddenly I saw myself through your eyes, what I've become, what I've allowed to happen to you both. He leaned forward, his voice gaining intensity. Then today, seeing Dad so alert without his usual medication, watching you stand up, to all of us with such dignity, Mom. I couldn't keep pretending. This isn't who I want to be. Frank studied our son for a long moment. "Words are easy, Kevin. What matters now is what you're going to do. Kevin straightened his shoulders, a flash of the sun we'd raised visible through the stranger he'd become. I'm going to fix this, starting now. He turned to Michael. Mr. Carter, I'll sign whatever documents you need to invalidate the deed transfer. It was obtained under false pretenses. Dad wasn't fully aware of what he was signing, and I exploited that. Michael looked genuinely surprised. That's a significant admission, Mr. Reynolds. It's the truth, Kevin replied simply. And regarding the power of attorney for Dad's health care, that should be revoked immediately. He's clearly capable of making his own decisions or designating Mom as his healthcare proxy if needed. Frank and I exchanged astonished glances. This was more than we'd dared hope for, a complete capitulation and admission of wrongdoing, without court battles or forced negotiations. What about Allison and her family? I asked cautiously. Kevin's expression hardened. They need to leave. All of them. I see now that they've been manipulating me from the beginning, using my financial troubles and then Dad's health crisis to take control of everything. They won't go quietly, Frank warned, not after coming this close to getting what they wanted. I know, Kevin acknowledged. That's why I need your help, all of you. He glanced at Michael. I need to untangle my finances from theirs, legally and permanently. And I need to stand up to Allison, which won't be easy. Do you think she knew what her parents were doing? I asked, trying to understand the full scope of the betrayal. Kevin hesitated. I think she knew more than she pretended to. The medication adjustments, those were deliberate. She and her mother discussed the dosages, timing them so Dad would be most sedated when important decisions needed to be made. His face flushed with shame again. I heard them once but convinced myself they were just trying to manage his comfort. Frank's expression darkened. They were drugging me to keep me compliant. That's criminal behavior, Kevin. I know, he whispered. That's why I'm prepared to testify about everything I've witnessed if it comes to that. But I'm hoping we can resolve this without courts and public exposure. Michael considered this. It might be possible with your cooperation. A legally binding agreement detailing the reversal of the deed transfer, vacation of the premises, by the Parkers, and proper medical care for Mr. Reynolds going forward. They'll fight it, Kevin warned. Especially my father-in-law. He's invested too much in this plan to walk away easily. Let them fight, I said firmly. We have the truth on our side now, and your testimony if needed. Kevin nodded, then looked at his father with anguish in his eyes. Dad, I don't expect you to forgive me. Not right away. Maybe not ever. What I've allowed to happen here. It's unforgivable. Frank studied our son for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, with effort, he stood from the bed and crossed the room to where Kevin sat. He placed a hand on our son's shoulder, his voice gruff with emotion. You're my son, he said simply. I raised you to know right from wrong, and today, you're choosing right. That counts for something. Tears spilled down Kevin's cheeks as he reached up to grasp his father's hand. I'll make this right, I promise. See that you do, Frank replied, his voice firm but not unkind. A commotion in the hallway interrupted the moment, raised voices approaching rapidly. The door burst open without warning, and Richard stormed in, his face contorted with rage. What the hell is taking so long? He demanded. We've been waiting for 20 minutes while you have your little family chat. Behind him, Allison and Diane hovered anxiously, trying to gauge what had transpired in their absence. Kevin stood, squaring his shoulders as he faced his father-in-law. We've made a decision, he announced, his voice steadier than I'd heard it in months. You need to leave, all of you. This house belongs to my parents, and it's time for things to go back to the way they should be. Richard stared at him in disbelief, then let out a harsh laugh. Is this a joke? After everything we've done for you? It's not a joke, Kevin replied calmly. I'm undoing the deed transfer and revoking the healthcare proxy. Dad will receive proper medical care from his original physician, and Mom will return to the main house where she belongs. Allison pushed past her father, her expression a mixture of shock and betrayal. Kevin, what are you saying? We discussed this. All the plans we made, our future in this house. Plans built on manipulating and mistreating my parents, Kevin replied, not backing down. I was wrong to go along with it, and I'm ending it now. Richard's face had turned an alarming shade of purple. You ungrateful little... He stepped toward Kevin menacingly, only to find Michael smoothly interposing himself between them. I strongly advise against any physical threats, Mr. Parker, he said pleasantly. They would only strengthen our case. Should this matter go to court? Court? Diane echoed, her voice rising in panic. There's no need for courts. We're family. Family doesn't drug an elderly man to keep him compliant, I said sharply. Family doesn't exile a woman to her basement. Family doesn't steal a home through deception and coercion. Allison's gaze darted between Kevin and her parents, calculation evident in her expression. Kevin, sweetheart, you're upset. We all are. But we can work through this together. Find a compromise that works for everyone. There's no compromise here, Kevin replied firmly. What happened was wrong, all of it. The only solution is for you and your family to leave, and for my parents to have their home back. And where exactly are we supposed to go? Richard demanded. Back to a house that no longer exists? You know our situation. That's not our problem, Frank said, his voice quiet but firm. Your financial difficulties don't entitle you to take our home. Richard's expression turned cold and calculating. Fine. If that's how you want it, let's talk reality. That deed transfer is legal, signed and notarized. The healthcare proxy is legally binding. You want to fight this in court? Go ahead. We'll drag it out for years while your husband's health deteriorates and your son's business collapses without our support. Are you threatening us? I asked incredulously. I'm stating facts, Richard replied with chilling calm. Courts take time, lawyers cost money, and Frank's health won't improve while this drags on. His gaze shifted to Kevin. As for you, those loans I personally guaranteed, I can call them due immediately. How long do you think the store will last then? Kevin paled but stood his ground. Do your worst. Some things are more important than money or businesses. My parents' well-being is one of them. I felt a surge of pride through my worry. This was the son we had raised, flawed and human. Yes, but ultimately guided by a moral compass that pointed true. Michael stepped forward, his demeanor shifting from pleasant to dangerously focused. Mr. Parker, are you actually threatening to use financial leverage to continue what appears to be elder abuse? Because I'd be very interested to have that statement. On record. Richard faltered slightly, suddenly aware of the legal quicksand he was wading into. I'm simply pointing out the practical realities of the situation. The practical reality, Michael countered, is that I have documented evidence of medication mismanagement, financial exploitation, and undue influence, all of which constitute elder abuse under Ohio law. Add to that, Mr. Kevin Reynolds's testimony about the circumstances of the deed transfer and healthcare proxy, and you're looking at a case that could involve not just civil penalties but potentially criminal charges. The word criminal landed like a physical blow. Diane gasped audibly, while Allison's carefully maintained composure crumbled entirely. Criminal? She whispered. But I was just following the doctor's instructions for Frank's medication. Were you? Michael asked pleasantly. We'll be reviewing the actual prescription orders from the original physician, as well as the circumstances under which Dr. Winters took over Mr. Reynolds's care. If there are discrepancies, they will be thoroughly investigated. Allison looked to Kevin in panic, but found no support in his resolute expression. For perhaps the first time, she realized she stood alone in this. Her husband had chosen his parents over her family's scheme. Richard, however, wasn't ready to concede. This is ridiculous. You can't possibly prove. Would you like to explain to a judge why Frank's cognition improves dramatically when his medication is misplaced for a day? I interrupted. Or why a healthy, independent woman in her 60s needed to be confined to a basement apartment with a locked door at the top of the stairs? Or perhaps you'd prefer to explain the conversation your daughter and wife had about timing Frank's sedatives for when important decisions needed to be made. Richard's mouth opened and closed soundlessly, his gaze darting to Kevin in sudden understanding. You're turning against your own wife? Your family? I'm choosing what's right, Kevin replied simply. Something I should have done months ago. A heavy silence fell over the room as the Parkers finally began to grasp the completeness of their defeat. With Kevin's testimony added to our documentation and Frank's improved condition without the excessive medication, their position was untenable. Diane was the first to break, her shoulders slumping in defeat. Richard, she said quietly, it's over. We need to go. Go where? He demanded, but the fight was draining from his voice. Wherever people go when they can't steal someone else's home, Frank replied evenly. That's not our concern. Michael stepped forward again, his portfolio open. I've drafted a preliminary agreement outlining the terms of your departure and the reversal of the legally questionable actions taken these past months. I suggest you review it carefully before deciding whether litigation is really the path you wish to pursue. He handed a document to Richard, who took it with visible reluctance. As he scanned the pages, his expression shifted from anger to resignation. Whatever terms Michael had included, they were clearly preferable to a court battle they would likely lose. 30 days, Richard said finally, his voice hollow. That's not much time to find new housing. It's 30 days more than you gave me when you moved me to the basement, I observed coolly. Richard's gaze met mine, a curious mixture of resentment and reluctant respect in his eyes. You're tougher than we gave you credit for, Martha. A mistake many people make about older women, I replied. We're not fragile, and we're certainly not easily intimidated, especially when protecting our families. Allison stepped forward, addressing Kevin directly. And what about us? Our marriage? Have you thought about what this means for our future? Kevin met her gaze steadily. Honestly, Allison, I don't know if we have a future after this. You participated in drugging my father and exiling my mother to the basement. That's not something I can easily forgive or forget. She flinched, as if slapped. I was trying to help your family. No, he corrected gently. You were helping your family take over my parents' home. There's a difference. Tears welled in her eyes. Whether of genuine remorse or frustrated anger, I couldn't tell. So that's it? Years of marriage thrown away because you suddenly developed a conscience? Better late than never, Frank murmured, loud enough for everyone to hear. Allison shot him a venomous glance, then turned back to Kevin. This isn't over, she said quietly. You'll regret this decision. With that parting threat, she stormed from the room, followed by a shaken Diane. Richard lingered a moment longer, his expression unreadable as he looked between Frank, Kevin, and me. Sign the agreement by tomorrow, Michael instructed him. Or we proceed with legal action immediately. Richard gave a curt nod, then left without another word, closing the door behind him with careful restraint. As his footsteps receded down the hall, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. Not completely gone, but lighter than it had been in months. I looked at Frank, whose eyes shone with a clarity I'd missed desperately. Then at Kevin, who stood straighter despite the pain evident in his expression. What now? Kevin asked quietly. Now, I said, taking Frank's hand in mine. we start putting our family back together, one piece at a time. The next 3 weeks unfolded in a delicate dance of transition and healing. True to their word, the Parkers signed Michael's agreement the following day, not with grace, but with the grudging acknowledgement of people who recognized they'd been outmaneuvered. Richard and Diane began packing immediately, their movements throughout the house marked by tense silence and pointed glares. Allison remained longer, making desperate attempts to reconcile with Kevin. I overheard their conversations sometimes, her voice alternating between tearful pleas and sharp accusations, his responses growing firmer and more resolved with each passing day. Whatever love had existed between them couldn't withstand the revelation of her willing participation in her family's scheme. "She keeps saying she did it all for us," Kevin confided to me one evening as we sat together on the back porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of amber and gold. "That securing this house was about our future, our children someday." "And what do you say to that?" I asked, curious about my son's evolving perspective. He was quiet for a moment, his hands wrapped around a mug of coffee that had long gone cold. "I tell her that a future built on hurting others isn't one I want any part of, especially when those others are my parents." By the second week, Frank had regained significant strength once his medication was adjusted back to appropriate levels. His original doctor, horrified by the unauthorized changes to his prescriptions, documented everything meticulously for our record should legal action become necessary later. Frank began taking short walks around the neighborhood, his steps growing steadier each day, his mind increasingly sharp and focused. "It's like waking from a fog," he told me as we strolled arm in arm through Willow Creek Park, the spring flowers, nodding gently in the breeze. I knew something was wrong, but couldn't quite grasp what it was. They kept me just coherent enough to sign things, but not alert enough to question them. I squeezed his arm gently. "It's over now. They can't hurt us anymore." His expression turned troubled. "But they did hurt us, Martha. And they hurt Kevin too, in ways that may take much longer to heal." He was right, of course. The damage to our family extended beyond the physical control of our home or Frank's medication. Our son carried the weight of his complicity, his face often shadowed with shame when he thought no one was looking. The betrayal had fractured something fundamental between us all, not irreparably perhaps, but significantly. By the beginning of the third week, the house began to empty of the Parkers' presence. Richard and Diane had found a small apartment across town, taking their furniture and possessions with silent efficiency. Brian and Jennifer, who had remained largely uninvolved in the final confrontation, were the first to leave, offering awkward but seemingly genuine apologies as they departed. "I knew it wasn't right," Jennifer admitted quietly as she hugged me goodbye. "We should have said something sooner." The most difficult moment came when Richard and Diane finally removed the last of their belongings from what had been our master bedroom. Frank and I stood in the doorway, surveying the space that had once been our sanctuary, now stripped of familiarity. The walls had been repainted in colors I would never have chosen, the carpet replaced with hardwood that bore no resemblance to our original floors. "We'll make it ours again," Frank promised, his arm secure around my waist. "It already is," I replied, leaning into his embrace, "because we're in it together." That night, we slept in our own bed for the first time in months. The mattress was new. I couldn't bear to keep the one they had used, but the feeling of rightness, of restoration, wrapped around us like a familiar blanket. On the morning marking exactly 3 weeks since Michael's intervention, Allison left. Kevin helped her carry her suitcases to the car, their conversation too low for me to hear from where I watched through the kitchen window. There was a moment when she reached for his hand, her expression pleading, but he stepped back, maintaining the distance between them. When she drove away, he stood in the driveway for a long time, staring after her with an expression I couldn't quite read. Is It final? I asked when he finally came inside, his shoulders bent as if carrying an invisible weight. She's filing for divorce next week, he answered, his voice tired but resolved. Her lawyer will contact Michael about the details. I placed a hand on his arm. I'm sorry, Kevin. He looked at me, genuine surprise crossing his features. You're sorry? After what she did to you and Dad? I'm sorry that your marriage ended this way, I clarified. Not that it ended. It needed to, after what happened. But that you're hurting. No mother wants to see her child in pain, even when that pain is necessary. His eyes filled with tears that he quickly blinked away. I don't deserve your compassion. Mom. You're getting it anyway, I replied simply. That's how family is supposed to work. Later that evening, as Frank and I sat in our reclaimed living room, now stripped of Diane's garish decorating choices and slowly returning to a space that reflected our taste in history, Kevin joined us with 3 glasses and a bottle of Frank's favorite scotch. I think we need this, he said, pouring generous measures for each of us. Frank accepted his glass with a nod. What are we drinking to? Kevin considered the question seriously. To honesty, he finally said. And to fixing what's broken, even when it's hard. We touched glasses solemnly, the crystal making a clear, bright sound in the quiet room. The scotch burned pleasantly as I sipped it, warming me from the inside out, much like the cautious hope that had begun to grow since our home had been returned to us. The store, Kevin said after a moment of comfortable silence. I need to tell you both the whole truth about it. Frank leaned forward slightly. We're listening. Kevin set his glass down, his expression serious. It's salvageable, but barely. Richard did help restructure the debt, but some of his solutions were questionable. I've been meeting with a legitimate financial advisor this week, and we've developed a plan to keep it afloat. Will it work? I asked. With a lot of effort and some significant changes, yes. He took a deep breath. But I need to be honest about something else. I don't want to run the hardware store anymore. I never really did. Frank's eyebrows rose in surprise. But you took it over so eagerly when I got sick. Because I thought that's what you wanted, Kevin explained. What would make you proud? But the truth is, I've been miserable there for years. It's your dream, Dad, not mine. A complicated mixture of emotions crossed Frank's face. Surprise, disappointment, and finally, understanding. What do you want to do instead? Kevin's expression lightened slightly. Remember my woodworking? The pieces I used to make in your workshop when I was younger? Frank nodded, a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. You were good, really good. I've never stopped loving it, Kevin admitted. I've been designing furniture in my spare time for years, sketches, prototypes. I want to build custom pieces like you taught me. Maybe even incorporate a small showroom into the hardware store. Transition it gradually into something that combines practical supplies with craftsmanship. Frank was quiet for a moment, processing this revelation. Then he reached over and squeezed Kevin's shoulder. Show me these designs of yours. The tension visibly drained from Kevin's body at his father's words. Really? You're not disappointed? That my son wants to create beautiful things with his hands, just like I taught him? Frank shook his head. How could I be disappointed in that? As they talked, their voices growing more animated with each passing minute, I sat back and watched them, my husband and my son, finding their way back to each other through shared passion and renewed honesty. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. Trust, once broken, takes time to rebuild. But in that moment, I saw the foundation being laid for something stronger than what had existed before. 1 month to the day after Michael Carter walked into our home and changed everything. The last. Traces of the Parkers' presence were gone. The house felt both familiar and new, like an old friend seen with fresh eyes. We had repainted some walls, rearranged furniture, and slowly reclaimed each space as our own. That evening, I stood in our bedroom, gazing out the window at the garden that was beginning to recover from Diane's misguided improvements. Frank's roses were showing new growth, and I had replanted my vegetable garden, the neat rows of seedlings promising future harvests. Frank came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist and resting his chin on my shoulder. "Penny, for your thoughts?" I leaned back against him, savoring the solid strength of his embrace. "I was just thinking about how close we came to losing everything." "But we didn't," he reminded me gently, "because you refused to accept what was happening. You fought back when it would have been easier to give in." I turned in his arms to face him. "I couldn't bear seeing you drugged into submission, or watching our home being taken over by people who saw us as obstacles rather than human beings." His eyes, clear and focused in a way I had missed desperately during those dark months, studied my face with tender appreciation. "You know, when I married you 40 years ago, I knew you were strong, but I never imagined just how strong until I saw you standing up to all of them, refusing to be pushed aside or silenced." "I had help," I reminded him. "Susan, Michael, even Brian in his way." "But it started with you," Frank insisted, "with one phone call to an attorney, because you knew what was happening was wrong and you weren't afraid to fight it." I thought about that moment in my car, hands trembling. As I dialed Michael's number, tears streaming down my face. I had been afraid, terrified even, but more afraid of what would happen if I did nothing. It wasn't courage so much as necessity, I admitted. I couldn't bear the alternative. Frank smiled, the lines around his eyes crinkling in the way I had always loved. "That's exactly what courage is, Martha. Doing what needs to be done, despite the fear." Later that night, as we prepared for bed in our reclaimed sanctuary, I caught sight of myself in the mirror. Not the defeated woman who had been exiled to the basement, but someone stronger, more resolved. The experience had changed me, hardened certain edges while softening others. I thought of Kevin, now sleeping in his old room down the hall, working through his own process of reconciliation and redemption. Of the hardware store, slowly transforming under his new vision into something that honored Frank's legacy while embracing Kevin's talents. Of our home, wounded but healing, much like the family within it. "No one will ever push us aside again," I whispered to my reflection, a promise to myself and to all those who might underestimate an older woman's determination to protect what matters most. Frank came up behind me, meeting my eyes in the mirror. "No," he agreed softly. "They won't dare try." As we settled into bed, his arm curving protectively around me, I felt a profound sense of completion. Not because our troubles were over. There would be challenges ahead, legal matters to resolve, relationships to rebuild, but because we had reclaimed what was most precious, our dignity, our home, and our right to determine our own future. The basement apartment remained, a silent reminder of what had nearly been lost. Kevin had suggested renovating it back into a traditional basement, erasing all evidence of my exile there, but I had refused. "Leave it," I told him, "as a reminder." "Of what they did to you?" he had asked, concerned. "No," I replied, thinking of that first call to Michael, the beginning of our liberation. "As a reminder that even when you feel most powerless, you always have options. You always have your voice. And sometimes, one phone call can change everything." Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.